My name is Students. I'm a second level student in the Department of Psychology. And my topic is called From Trauma to Spirit. So trauma to spirit is about the transformational journey of the mind with the use of psychology and mysticism. So we will start off talking about a little bit about trauma. We will start with physical trauma. We all know what it is. We all had a small or big wound in our life. We also know that in the process of healing, scar tissue is formed. Right? Scar tissue, unfortunately, has one significant defect. It reduces functionality. So, for example, when I was a child, I had an accident. I hit my elbow, and then I could not bend my elbow for a while because the scar tissue becomes stiff, right? Very well. So as well I was researching, I found this article, and I found the subheading very interesting. It reads that scarring that you don't see can cause the most misery, which relates to what I'm going to talk about, but we will talk about that later. So psychological trauma, we usually think of it, we think of major events like war, or abuse, or rape. We think of those to be the main causes of trauma, but trauma actually can be induced from much more minor but more frequent repetitive events. So let's say when you're a child, maybe your parents were screaming at you. That can cause a trauma. It doesn't have to be a great trauma, but it can be a trauma. Or maybe you were neglected as a child. And that can also cause trauma. So you're going to hear me talk a lot about childhood, and that has to do with that for children, like in our development or of personality, childhood plays a very important role. But what I care the most is the trauma we're not aware of. How trauma that is beyond our consciousness, not something that is not so blatant, affects our life and our personality. So traumatic events can fade from our consciousness. They can be hidden from our memory, right? But the coping mechanisms, they remain. And those mechanisms, we can think of them as, let me check something. So you can imagine coping mechanisms to be something like, a form of coping mechanisms can be like roadblocks in the mind. So you can think that consciousness is, as it moves around the mind, it's prohibited from going to certain areas. Those certain areas are full with traumatic events or feelings, uncomfortable feelings connected to these events. So we are traumatized in very different ways. Some of them are less important, some of them are more important. Give me a minute, please. But they all significantly influence our personality. So an example can be a child that is neglected or is criticized after failing every time. So you're a child, every time you do something wrong, someone in the family tells you you're not good enough, you cannot do it well, blah, 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 blah. That can create a coping mechanism. And that coping mechanism in your other life can seem that you are lazy. But in fact, you are avoiding failure. So you don't take risks, you're not trying to do something new, and you might seem to be lazy, but in truth, your mind has created a coping mechanism to avoid being exposed to that traumatic experience again. Another example could be that if you're neglected in childhood. Again, an example can take many forms, but this is just to make it a little more simple. So you're neglected, and you have this problematic relationship with people with love. So we say that your heart is closed, and you cannot form meaningful relationships. That results that maybe you have casual, superficial sexual relationships, but you cannot have an intimate, deep relationship of love. Culture can also induce trauma. As an example, if you have some homosexual tendencies and you are in an environment that homosexuality is this homophobia, then you might suppress those feelings, and instead you can be the worst fighter against homosexuality and turn really aggressive, because the consequences of being your true self are very bad. Okay? The emotions attached to that can be very bad. So here comes the article I talked to you about before. The scarring you don't see can cause the most misery. Well, that can be true for psychological trauma too. So to recap, a little simple. Physical trauma, it's caused by external factors, and so is psychological trauma. It's something that happens to us, right? Well, now various definitions are updated. So the body creates scar tissue, and the mind creates coping mechanisms. So we can kind of simply say, like in a simplistic way, you can say that those coping mechanisms are the scars of the mind, in a sense. So the scars reduce the functionality of the body, and the coping mechanisms reduce the functionality of the mind. As we said, those roadblocks, those points. So trauma makes the mind stiff. It creates all these points of, oh, that was wrong, but anyway, the mind creates all these points that makes the life rigid. It makes life, you cannot experience life fully, right? So, guys, let me go back to this. Forgive me. So, and another way to say it, we would say it in a more mystical approach, then we would say that the mind, when the trauma confines the spirit, right? It makes the spirit inaccessible, makes the mind inaccessible to the spirit. Or maybe, in different words, it doesn't allow the spirit to manifest. Now, spirit. Well, spirit, to define spirit, it's not easy, of course. It's something very abstract. It exists throughout cultures and religions. But I pick now this definition from Joseph Smith Jr., who is actually the founder of Mormonism. And I'm not a Mormon, but he says that there is no such thing as immaterial matter. All spirit is matter, but it's more fine or pure, and can only be discerned by purer eyes. Well, I would say in a more rationalistic, non-metaphysical way, that the spirit is the unmanifested capabilities of the mind. Okay? Of course, this is a simplistic view of something very abstract, but I think we can use it in order to proceed. So, traditionally, there are many types of spirits, right? Good, bad, devils, angels. The spirit we are interested in, or I'm interested in this case, is, we would say, the Holy Spirit. And again, it's in the use of words. So for Buddhists, for example, the Holy Spirit, the Buddha nature, or the Christ consciousness is more or less one and the same. So we could say that the Spirit is the unmanifested mind of good, of love, compassion, and purity. Mysticism can view as a very ancient path of comprised of various tools that there. It's a transformational path of the mind. So getting the mind from point A to point B. So if you're a dark wizard, you might want to embody a bad spirit. So that you bring forward power, anger, control. If you want to head towards a good spirit, you would choose maybe Christ or Buddha or a deity that has these qualities, right? So, So a Christian mystic would work towards the mind of Christ, or a Buddhist would walk towards a deity like Vajrasattva or Tara, and these are embodiments of certain qualities of the mind. That's quite a different approach from classical religion, and this is something that I've not found out myself, but it's a combination of my knowledge. So Christ, without wanting to offend anyone, can be seen as the man that embodied totally the mind of God. The man that could see the mind of God. And Christ says God is love. So Christ could see the mind of love. So from trauma to spirit, I propose that we first heal ourselves from our traumas. Our traumas are countless for everyone. Everyone has traumas, either small, either big, and they influence our personality. They work in ways that we don't understand. And after we do the healing, we can move towards to a next step that is beyond healing, and it's an active step towards the embodiment of the Spirit. And when I say the Spirit, of the Holy Spirit, of goodness. So there are numerous methods of healing, both mystical, with tantric practices, meditations, yoga. There's so many ways to do it. And there is the psychological, from the psychology field, right? I believe that psychology has now matured and has very good tools in order to create healing, to help healing, because healing is something that we do ourselves. A psychologist or a mystic, they can only create the space that can give you the opportunity to heal. My approach, and I'm sorry for that, Dr. Lalas, who is a cognitive psychologist, is the experiential therapy. I believe that this is a very effective method, and that is because it enables the individual to interact with the trauma. And by doing so, it can dismantle the trauma. When you face what Jung calls the shadow, you look and you go towards your pain is, where your fear is. And you experience that again and again and again until it is dismantled. But most importantly, it makes you strong. When you look at your dark side, when you go through the pain, when you go through the fear, you become powerful. And that is something that we need in life. Life is difficult and we need the strength. Okay, we need a strong mind. And those that have shed light on their shadow, well, they gain some very interesting abilities. You gain something else, something new. You have better awareness of yourself, and you have that magical power to go forward. So what about the spirit? Well, here things get more abstract, and it can be a spontaneous realization. So there are people that have these mystical experiences out of nowhere, and they see something else, something different. They see maybe the mind of God, or they see the mind of love, or the mind of Buddha. It can be described in many, many ways. Or it can be taught by a teacher, a guru, in a monastery. Like what Christians do is not different from what maybe Muslims do, or maybe from Buddhists do. So, lastly, maybe you can try to understand that spirit yourself. To meditate, to try to understand the conscience of the divine consciousness. So, if we think that Jesus or Buddha lived more than 2,000 years before, we can understand why those people were so important. Because to see the mind of compassion 2,000 years ago would be much more difficult than to do today. Okay? Now we're much more capable and evolved towards love and understanding instead of war. Okay, we still have a lot of way to go, of course, but we're much closer. So I believe that small Buddhas will start popping up more and more and more. Enlightened minds are popping out more and more frequently. So from trauma to spirit is the idea It's not the first, to be honest, of combining psychology with mysticism in order to create a better world. And I believe that therapy relieves us from our own suffering. But the Spirit relieves the world from suffering. I think that's about it. Thank you. Is there any questions?
So with such a presentation, you would.
Yes.
You talk about coping mechanisms and how we should limit them. And you talk again
Dismantle them.
about dismantle them. Okay. And you talk that we can do that by the help of having the mind of love or God or what
No.
you said.
If I may interrupt you.
Yeah.
You dismantle the coping mechanisms through healing. And that can be done with therapy as an example. So the mind of God is the next step, is when you're free from your own suffering. When your mind is not constrained anymore from your traumas, then you can take an active stance. And that is the Spirit that you're embodying.
Great. So another addition, but I think, I don't know what you think about this, you know more about it, that this next step of finding the mind of God or love might be a part of the coping mechanism that your brain creates.
Now, all these things cannot be approached from 1,000 different directions. It's so complicated, so abstract, you cannot have a single approach. My approach is, I think, like we put some kind of steps, and it's the two basic steps. The one is you heal yourself. So first, you focus in yourself. First, if you don't focus on yourself, you cannot step out of yourself to focus at others. If you're suffering, if you have pain, mental pain, if you have all these limiting beliefs or limiting psychological traumas, you cannot embody the Spirit. And this is only an approach. You cannot take the step towards an outwards expression of yourself. And that is the embodiment of the Spirit. The Spirit of God, the Spirit of Jesus, is the Spirit of doing good, being a good human being.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helps.
Can make the picture clear.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else? Yes?
I want to ask, is even the Spirit, is it like religious based, or is it basically like finding your own consciousness? Because if you don't believe, you're not a believer in any type of religion. And although like self-consciousness, in a way that you accept every aspect of you, is this type of spirit for you?
Spirit is something, again, very abstract.
Yeah.
In Greek, it's called pneuma. It's an ancient terminology. It comes from breath. And it can be viewed in many different ways again. The way I approach Spirit in this particular presentation is the unmanifested quality of the mind. So the mind that exists outside of yourself, because you don't have that mind, right? But you can embody it. So it's like, you can say that's the target state, but it's not a target state of anything. It's a very specific target state. So that's why we say you can embody both bad and good spirits. So you can strive towards power. And that's in that process, like if you are a Buddhist, or not a Buddhist, but if you are a magician, how you call it? Like, you have Gandalf and the other guy.
Wizard.
The other wizard, what was the name of the other wizard? Saruman. He went the path of evil. And Gandalf went the path of goodness, right? So, the Spirit, in the way you describe it, it's not exactly what I mean. You can think of the Spirit as something that comes from outside, although it doesn't exist without you. It's a bit of a mess, but
Abstract.
yeah.
It's nice.
I don't know.
It's quite clear.
Yeah? Yes?
You said we can have both good and bad spirits. What if someone
actually seeks power, actually seeks money, let's say.
Yes. Well, there are ways to.
Is this bad for himself or is this bad for
Let me give you an example. Thank you very much. Let me give you an example. You know what Satanists do?
Yes.
Why do they do their rituals? Why do they prefer murders and homicides and sacrifices?
That's not Satan.
Some of them.
Some of them, the religious people who have named Satan, they are not.
Okay, let's choose another word. Okay, some occultists, let's say dark occultists, which would be fine with that definition. Why do they do what they do? They do that to provoke the lower realms, I would say, the lower levels of existence. So to not show sympathy. When you do sacrifices, you train your mind not to show sympathy, for example. And as you do these practices, you head towards an evil person. Like we can easily define good and bad now in a context of everyday life, right?
But that's the thing, for me and you, that's bad. But
For them, it might be good. Of course, everything is relative in this sense. But I believe that the world, governed by these lower instincts, that is hatred, envy, jealousy, we have been in this world. We are still living in this world. This is what creates all these problems, all this hell that we're experiencing, all these wars and all this. So, in a sense, it's bad for humanity. I believe that it's bad for humanity. You can believe, of course, something different. So that's why I said that we choose the Spirit of God and we head towards that, because there lies our liberation. And that's why I chose the scriptures, to show that we have to move towards that part of those kind of spirits, those kind of embodiments. Thank you. Anyone else? We're done? Okay. Thank you guys very much.